Okay, hands up if you also struggle with control. Yes, I know I can't see you, but it is the idea that we are all committing to the fact that, man, we struggle. We simultaneously want a break, some room to breathe, a little less on our plates, yet we keep saying yes to anything that comes our way. We never ask for help, and if and when we do, we either end up micromanaging, correcting, or criticizing the other person or people trying to help, only leading us back to taking the wheel we keep complaining about holding on to in the first place. But to what extent? To prove that we can? Trying to control everything around us is only disrupting the relationships and connections that we can build with others and anchors our self-worth on doing rather than being. We try to control the world around us while avoiding taking control of what's inside, our thoughts, feelings, unresolved pain and distress. And at some point, it's going to come back to haunt us. Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm Kira Wackett. Thanks for joining me for another solo episode of the Untethering Shame podcast. Today I want to talk about our relationship with control, because if we're being honest, boy, does it need some work. The overemphasis on trying to control or manage things in our life that we ultimately have no business controlling is a product of shame and low self-efficacy. It goes back to the idea of feeling as though it's our responsibility to take care of everything and everyone, creating this false sense of power and control that ultimately keeps us trapped. You have to be able to do and handle it all, but the it is incredibly misdirected and externally anchored to focus on people and circumstances outside of us and our control. And all this does is leaves us trapped inside of what's referred to as the drama triangle, where you're constantly oscillating between feeling like you're responsible for everything, the problem in every situation, and yet can control nothing in your life. Now, I'm going to put a link to an episode that I did earlier this year on the drama triangle for you to dive deeper in this, because I think the information is an absolute game changer. And when we find ourselves here, the work we need to do to accomplish our goals becomes out of reach. Because what we've done is we've put ourselves inside of something that we have no control or anchor over, but all we do is swirl round and round inside. But no matter how much we want to or are excited for and about our goals, dismantling ourselves from this storyline, the storyline that's keeping us stuck in that triangle, operating under these false assumptions and pressures, isn't going to go away overnight. It takes a significant amount of time and energy to even allow the possibility that we can't control or aren't responsible for all the things that we have falsely told ourselves we are, and then to let it go entirely. Now, I know this is one more thing that I'm telling you can't just be fixed. That's because life is constantly changing. We're growing and evolving, and who we are evolves as context and experiences deepen. Recognizing every cue for shame or creating boundaries that impede it from coming in is nearly impossible. You can't change this. You just get to decide what you do with it. And in our case, we're working to control what we can inside of our reality. From here, we can then find a direct path towards living our most purposeful and authentic life. And much of this is going to lie in our ability to hold on to this familiar question that we've talked about in so many other episodes. Why? Why do you have to be able to do it all? Why do you need to be liked by everyone? Why do they need to understand? Why do you have to do and be X at all times or manage everything for everyone else? Why do you have to be in control? And to what end? What's the cost-benefit analysis of this hyperfixation? Where does it leave you? Now, to do the work and to start to dismantle these pieces, you have to move through two sections, clarifying what is and what isn't in our control. The first section is focused on letting go, or naming everything we don't have control over, and then beginning the work to release our thoughts, pressures, and assumptions from our story. So to make this work easier for you, I've included a link to a handout that walks you through an exercise called the control wheel, which will help you complete both parts of the work. You can also get a sheet of paper and label one side out of my control and the other side in my control. Now, starting with what's outside of your control, I want you to start to list everything that comes to mind when you think about it. Be as exhaustive as possible. Consider weather, other people, your past or future, circumstances like whether or not there's traffic on your way to work, and global events. Ask yourself, are you holding on to emotions from your past that are no longer serving you? Did something happen that affected you that's out of your control? And holding on to it, while it gives you some false sense of power, is doing nothing but keeping you stuck. And what role does holding on to it serve truly in your story? Where are you spending your precious resources, time, and energy on trying to control how other people think and feel about you when ultimately you have no ability to change that? And where are you getting lost perseverating about future anxieties outside of your control? Now, once you've developed your, what I'm assuming will be an exhaustive list, we'll start to reflect on the following. What does holding on to these things do for you? Positive, negative, and neutral. Specifically, what role can and does it play in your work to getting to your future self? I.e., trying to ensure that your boss thinks you're committed to your work and willing to give it your all. Is that going to get in the way of you setting boundaries with your time and energy so that you don't lose sight of other roles and priorities? What do you need from yourself or others to let this go? We'll be very intentional here that we focus on needs that are attainable and in our control. So for example, you might think, well, I can't control what happened in the past with my friend and I need to let it go. When you consider what you might need to do that, you could say, I can't let go of what they did to me until they acknowledge what they did and apologize. And do you see where this might get in the way? There's a rub here in that we can't control whether or not they ever apologize or see what they did or didn't do as wrong. We can't trade out one piece of control, i.e. what happened, to try to control something else that we still can't control, i.e. if they apologize. What's in your control is to reflect on what's holding on to this pain does to and for you and what it would look like to let it go, knowing that you might never get what you need or you felt like you needed to get resolution. Some of these points here are really painful because, again, as we think about letting go of those points where we've gotten stuck, we oftentimes try to sub in something else that we want to micromanage or control. And realizing that we have to relinquish all of those different dominoes feels really vulnerable. It's also necessary. This is the work of the forgiveness process. And for those stickier and trickier situations that we find ourselves having a hard time letting go in, I want you to put a pin in them. Just notice where that forgiveness piece might need to come in on a deeper level. And when you're ready, you can check out the links that I put in the show notes to dive deeper into that process. Finally, I want you to reflect on what choices need to be made as a result of what's come out of this work. So for example, maybe as we look at your relationship with your sibling or parent, we see some dynamics that we're addressing that are out of our control, and we need and want to work on letting go of that. Perhaps we start to see a theme in that we aren't getting what we want, and there's a lot we need that's also lacking. We might begin to see that we don't feel seen, safe, and heard within the relationship, or that this relationship exists entirely based on your maintaining a role or performing within it. This is where another layer of radical acceptance comes into play. As we consider roles in relationships, we need to ask ourselves if the data is pointing us in a direction that says we need to make a change. Radical acceptance can easily get caught up in shame. And in that, we'll just start telling ourselves to accept less, or that this is what we deserve or all we can get. That's the opposite of this work. That's letting go of things that we actually can control. And radical acceptance is about distinguishing what we can and can't control alongside of knowing what we're worth. Now, this part of the work is going to feel like a lot. As you're going through and answering these pieces, I want you to be kind to yourself. You're going to feel a lot of resistance and overwhelm. The first time that I did this, I remember feeling like I couldn't control anything and that all of my relationships were terrible. I almost felt numb as I sat in space thinking about this and its impact. Those thoughts are valid and they're not true. For most of us, we're deeply rooted to our shame stories, leaving us feeling both responsible for and yet incapable of controlling anything, and like we're constantly failing. So a lot of work is going to present itself here. That doesn't mean you're without love and connection. It doesn't mean you have no control or won't feel anchored in yourself. It just means we have to allow you to feel out of control long enough to land in a much more supportive and self-sufficient place. Okay, now the second part of this process is about focusing on what's in your control. This part is going to help you with that sense of re-anchoring. And I like to think about this in two ways. First, I think about simply my own actions, boundaries, relationships with others, stories, and myself, and begin to make my list. Then I like to look at my out of control list and ask myself what I can control about those circumstances, situations, or bullet points. The biggest thing that comes up for me is often the reality that how I respond to or build context around a story, experience, or feeling is the biggest thing in my control. So once you've done this, I want you to do some reflection. You can ask yourself, what effect would shifting your focus to these areas in your control have on your overall mood, energy, sense of self, and even time? For example, if I spent less time ruminating on whether or not someone likes me, I'd free up time to enjoy relationships I'm in and make choices more freely about how I show up. Second, how will it impact your focus and progress regarding your dreams, your needs, your goals? An example being, if I worried less about hurting other people's feelings by setting a boundary, I might take better care of my own needs and limits, which will in turn allow me to have healthier relationships with those and other people. Third, how will it affect your interpersonal relationships? So for example, I think a lot about how the tension that has and still exists with me in my personal and sometimes professional relationships is a result of the expectations I have or put on myself and or others for how we show up and engage in this relationship. When I learned to accept that I can control other people, how they act, respond, what they think, and that people are who they are, I can accept that I have the right to engage with them in a way that supports my values as well as maintains my mental, emotional, and physical needs and safety. This includes letting go of anger when other people don't do or say what I want, handle something different from how I would, or are stuck in a storyline that I don't want to support or be a part of. This also helps me relinquish the idea that their sense of emotional and mental well-being rests on me. Now I want you to ask yourself, what scares you about acknowledging your role and control here? What resistances do you feel coming up? Often fixating on what's out of our control is a perfect avoidance strategy that keeps many of us stuck in shame, pain, and blame. And finally, what do you need to feel confident in assuming control of these pieces? Now, as you go through this second part of the process, I want to point out a few general radical acceptance points that fall into that control category and are essential to make space for in the process and the work. First, you have a choice. Maybe it isn't always direct, but you do have one. And that is not a choice of resolve or about perpetuating stigmas, such as a BS belief that everyone can have a size 2 body or make 6 figures if they just worked hard enough. Those are shame-driven roles. I mean here that we still get to choose how we respond. We choose our mindset. We can choose not to give our power or time to people and situations that don't serve us, and we can name the fact that some things aren't okay and that we deserve better. Second, you are not responsible for other people's happiness or well-being, no matter how much they try to sell you on this idea. You can't control that, and when you prioritize that, you relinquish the one person's well-being in your control, your own. Third, you will never feel ready. It's not a destination point that we're going to land on when it comes to this work, but you can control the fact that you have the ability and right to do it anyways. And finally, number 4, self-care is not a choice. It's not optional, a luxury, or a low priority. It's a necessity. You cannot live the life you want and keep burning the candle at both ends. Athletes can't reach peak performance without days off or time spent stretching or taking care of their body. Think of this work as your life training. Self-care is your way of replenishing your energy and taking back time for yourself. Okay. Whew. Anyone else already feeling like this is a lot before you've even dove into the material? It's because it is. It's one of the biggest action steps in the entire shame resilience process, and that this is all about focusing on and letting go of control. Grief and loss and pain and distress are all associated in this. Learning to let go is scary. It leaves us feeling vulnerable, and it's super important that we remind ourselves that vulnerability isn't a sign that we're unsafe or at risk. It's a necessary sign of healing. Now, once you do this work, I want to make sure you come back to the comments and let us know one thing that you're going to take with you, either from this space of enlightenment or resistance, something you're going to focus on that's out of your control, that you've built some insight or ahas around, or a way you're going to shift things back into your control. Now, I really want to encourage you to share this with someone else that you think could benefit from hearing this. Of course, subscribing, leaving a review, hitting that 5-star button is essential to helping grow the podcast and the listenership. But the sharing and the open dialogue that's created when we put these resources around for people in our circles helps us feel more supported and heard and can encourage that ripple effect of change. If you're ready to take that next step in your own shame resilience journey, I want you to be sure to click the link in the show notes to download my free handout, 5 things shame resilient people do every day and 3 things they don't. And if you're looking for more ways to connect, you'll find links to my website and YouTube channel below, as well as a link to set up a discovery call to go over any questions you have about program offerings and your next steps in your shame resilience journey. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And remember, change takes time, but every step counts. So stay the course, stay hopeful, and stay committed to your well-being. We'll be back with more insightful discussions to support you on your journey. Until then, take care, and we'll catch you next episode.